Hey everybody, Paul Mack here. I've got another viewer question. This one comes from James Homa. Do you have any old cabin plans? I really dislike the new cabin plans. None of them look right or are laid out with a wood cook stove. Well, thanks. Really appreciate your videos and time. Well, you're welcome, James. And, I've got some old cabin plans, but, no blueprints, nothing really written down. It's kind of all up here, which, isn't saying a lot because the plans I have in my mind are just very simple. But I thought, James, that I would take the opportunity of your question here to talk about the way that cabins by our forefathers, our settler forefathers and mothers, were laid out. Because in the old days, and again, I'm talking about something that is anecdotal, cabins, pictures of cabins and of homes that I've seen, floor plans that I've talked to people, old timers who, some of them are now gone, and houses that I remember that were still standing when I was young. Again, a lot of this is anecdotal, and things like plans change from region to region, and based on the skill level of the farmer, these plans were very different from person to person. But generally speaking, there seemed to be, in the old days, a progression. A young couple would, acquire their homestead or their property or want to build their own home on an edge of their parents' property or whatever, and they would start off with a very simple structure, usually a one-room plan, whether it be log building or a frame construction, and it would progress as their means increased, their means of living increased due to their success or not, and they might add on after that, go this way and then this way and this way, and pretty soon, by the time they're an older couple, they had a larger, substantially larger structure than what they started out with. That's generally how things went in this country as far as farmer dwellings go, homesteaders and so forth. So James, I wanted to take this opportunity to kind of go into those changes in a little more detail. Again, it's going to be, this is general information, but I think a lot of it could still be useful to a lot of you viewers who are maybe new to small farming, new to homesteading, and you're starting out and you've just acquired a property, and the first thought, especially in your wife's mind, is where are we going to live? What are we going to live in? And so that's what we're going to be talking about today. Now, generally, our pioneer and settler forefathers and foremothers, I doubt if they carried around blueprints for their home either. They pretty much had it in their head, and the reason is pretty simple. Because what they built to start off was very simple. Whether it was a log home or if they had access to sawn lumber from a sawmill nearby, basically they started with a structure, and in my own anecdotal research, I generally have measured single pin cabins to be about 18 foot. A lot of times 18 foot wide by about 16 foot deep seem to be a common measurement. But, give or take, it could be 18 by 18, 16 by 16, 18 by 16, or whatever. But that generally seemed to be the norm, I suppose, because any bigger than that, you're dealing with much heavier logs. Maybe that's one reason. And 18 by 16, it's tight if you got, 12 kids, but it was done, and it was done often. People lived in small structures, even large families. They lived differently than we do. Their lifestyles were very different. But generally, an 18 by 16 structure is what I found. Now, again, as I said, a lot of these structures were either log buildings, which would be fairly simple with to build. I say fairly, relatively simple to build with simple tools. But also, some people early on had access to sawn lumber from primitive sawmills. And as far as that went, if they were using lumber like that to build their cabin, it was either a frame construction, like similar to what we have today with studs, however far apart, and headers, something like that, and then they would construct one wall, raise it, the other walls, raise them, and then join those walls together. There was also the Jenny Lind style of construction for dimensional lumber or sawn lumber, which is a different concept altogether. In the previous, in the simple framing, the studs are basically, support the structure. But in the Jenny Lind style, the actual wall boards are your load-bearing materials in the construction. So basically, in the Jenny Lind style, they would build a box-like framework, maybe I don't know, 2x8s, whatever they had, about 2x12s, and then they would put floor joist in between that box frame, and that box frame would be sitting on stone foundation or pier foundation with post, rot resistant ground contact posts that were set in the ground. The framework would sit on those, and then there might be a 2x something at the top, sort of like a header. And in the frame style construction or the Jenny Lind style construction, keep in mind that there was usually no insulation involved in either one of those. If it were studs, if you were inside the building, you would see the studs and the backside of the wall boards. Of course, with the Jenny Lind construction, there are no studs, so you're looking directly at the wall boards. And on the outside of the Jenny Lind construction, there might be battens. So that was a typical board and batten feature, and the battens would cover the cracks because a lot of times they didn't have time, might not have time to let the boards do their natural shrinking. So when they nailed them up, there would be, cracks, substantial cracks between the boards. So they would cover those cracks with smaller boards, battens, to cover the cracks. Now, my mother, whose father was a sharecropper, for much of her younger life, before she was a teenager, they would, whenever they went to a new place to farm it, usually the landowner provided them some kind of shack, sharecropper shack or whatever it was, similar to what we're talking about. And sometimes those often began with one room. And my mother would talk about how they would paste up newspaper to the inside of those wall boards just to keep a draft from coming through. And I think they would use make flour paste and paste those newspapers up. And she said a lot of times the glue would come undone, and when the wind was roaring outside, that the newspaper seemed to breathe, the walls seemed to breathe and would suck in and suck out with the draft. And I was building something for our little mercantile. I was building a display for my tool section, and I was using old boards that I'd salvaged from I don't know where. I just had them lying around, and as I got to building with it, I noticed there were little bits of newspaper. You could read the print still glued to the back of that board. In fact, I left them on there because I thought it was real cool, and I pointed out to some people who are interested in that kind of thing. Back to log construction. Usually the single room log cabin that we often think about and often see in paintings or in movies is called a single pen. I don't know why. P-E-N, single pen cabin. But usually, as I said, the single pen cabin was often 18 by 16 foot dimension. In fact, I want to read to you a little excerpt from one of my Arkansas history books, and this is an account. This is from Arkansas 1800 to 1860 by S. Charles Bolton, a historian. And this is an account of a German man who was making his way through Arkansas in the 1800s. His name was Friedrich Gerstacker. I hope I pronounced that. I'm not German. But he writes of staying in a crude cabin. He says, Friedrich Gerstacker described the subsistence economy of the backwoods. The accommodations, this is talking about where he stayed one night, because they didn't have hotels in the 1800s. Well, not a lot of them, not in the backwoods. The accommodations were crude but utilitarian. His dwelling was nothing but a simple, rough log house without any window. 2 beds, a table, a couple of chairs, one of them with arms, some iron saucepans, 3 plates, 2 tin pots, 1 saucer, several knives, and a coffee mill formed the whole of his furniture and kitchen utensils. So that is a first-hand account in the 1800s of just a simple one-pen log structure in the backwoods of Arkansas. Now, the single pen would look something similar to this right here, and it would be on a stone foundation or just whatever. The gable end here, and a roof here. I'm just roughly drawing this. I'm gonna skip the doors and the windows and the porch for now, just to show you the single pen. But now I want to talk to you about the double pen log structure, which was generally called a dog trot, and it would have been another pen located right beside this one with a breezeway in between. Now, the double pen log home or the dog trot log home would often begin as the settler would build his first structure, and again it would have a porch on it, maybe a back porch, and a fireplace on one side or another, or the wood stove, as James talked about, and they would live in that for a while until their family maybe started to expand, and then he would build an additional single pen to the side of this one to one gable end, but he would connect the roofs, he would connect the roofs and also the floor. He would put floor joists in here and extend the floor between them, but also extend the roof over to cover the second pen over here. And this was your typical dog trot. I suppose because, the dog, your kids, whatever, could just trot right through the middle. These were nice because it provided, and a lot of times they would situate the house so that the prevailing wind could flow through that breezeway, because, they didn't typically have air conditioning in the 1800s. So the breezeway made an excellent place to sit out in the hot of the summer day and shell your beans, your peas, or whittle, or just chat with neighbors or whatever, because it was going to be a little bit hot inside, especially if you had the cook stove going for your supper. So, and then and as time progressed, a lot of times what you would find is they would eventually enclose the dog trot with wall boards or whatever, and make another indoor room inside that. You'll find that today. In fact, I've seen one home, and this was not a log home, it was a framed home in our area that began as a dog trot. Maybe it even began as a single pen, and then two pens covered, and then they enclosed the breezeway for a larger home. And that's kind of how the homes would often grow, especially the dog trot homes. The trick would be getting this second pen, the logs, even so that you could add the log here, an extra long log if you had one. If not, you would maybe lap a couple of logs and splice them together on this side and on this side, and then continue your roof on out, covering the second pen. So the log dog trot or frame dog trot home. I've got another excerpt from another one of my books, A Documentary History of Arkansas, edited by several guys. And on page 64, this is another excerpt from Frederick Gerstacker. It says, 1837, left his native Germany for the United States, hoped to settle in Arkansas, joining with other German settlers and working to bring the territory into the Union as a German-speaking state. Interesting. I did not know that. He says here in his journaling, on the evening of the 6th day of May, 1838, after a rich feast of blackberries, says we came to a house belonging to a man of the name of Saint, and decided on staying there to sleep. I'm going to skip further on down. The house was built of logs, roughly cut. It consisted of two ordinary houses under one roof. He's describing the dog trot, with a passage between them open to north and south, a nice cool place to eat or sleep in during summer. Like all blockhouses of this sort, it was roofed with rough 4-foot planks. There were no windows, but in each house a good fireplace of clay. So that's the other thing I wanted to point out, is that usually, because it wouldn't be practical to put a fireplace, it'd mess up your roof line and everything, the fireplace would have been on, either side, and a lot of times on both sides, which obviously made the fireplace easy to build when it's on the gable end of either side. And it could be that this room was used for your cooking, maybe had your cooking utensils, your eating table, and whatever, and perhaps this one had the bed, and that fire was kept going at night to keep you warm on the winters, at least until it went out 3 o'clock in the morning. In one of my books I was reading, in early Arkansas history, homes averaged 6 persons per household living in 1 or 2 rooms of less than 300 square feet. Many slept outdoors or in the breezeway of a dog trot, but winter would have been a little more tricky with, everybody wanting to be on the inside there. And another thing I wanted to mention, that sometimes these single pen homes or cabins I mentioned before, occasionally, especially in Arkansas, they may not have a wood floor. It may be a dirt floor, which, incidentally, by the way, you may not know this, but if you have a nice dirt floor that you develop over a period of time, that thing will get so hard pan and so packed that actually there's accounts of women being able to sweep that floor just like a concrete floor. That's how hard it could get, that you could actually keep it rather clean. Imagine that, keeping a dirt floor clean. But it could be done. You've probably noticed this in sheds. I remember my Paul Mac, my grandpa's truck shed, had a dirt floor in it where he would park the truck. Of course, it had a little mixture of motor oil on the bottom too. But the truck shed became so hard packed that literally you could have swept it. It was a very, very hard surface. It was almost kind of hard to tell that wasn't concrete. And also, a lot of these homes took advantage of vertical space. If these pens were built tall enough, you could put, for instance, a little loft joist going across. Sometimes on some log homes you see those joist in logs sticking out of one side there, and those were logs that went across, and you could put floor planks on them and increase your living space by having a loft for the kids to sleep in upstairs. And also it could be a partial loft. It would not have to go all the way across the pen like that. This is really an extensive subject about cabins and dog trots, single pen cabins. We're gonna pause for now this video, and we'll go into it in a little more depth next time. We'll talk about how our settler forefathers began with something simple and added on. We'll do that next time. So until next time, I'm Paul Mac. I'll talk to you later. If you have watched Farmhand's Companion over the years, and perhaps you have already built a pole barn, or maybe you're in the middle of a pole barn project, or a log cabin like my log chicken house, or just anything, a fence. Maybe it's a fence. You've seen some of the fences that I built on the show, and you've built a fence for yourself that's pretty rustic looking and you're pretty proud of it. If it's convenient, I want you to take a photograph of your project and send it to me. You can go to farmhandscompanion.com, and if you drill down, you'll find contact Paul Mac somewhere on there. And through that email, just attach a photo or 2 or 3, not 100, but 1 or 2 or 3 photos of your work. And in a future show that I'm planning down the road, I'm going to feature a lot of projects that you, our viewers, have built around the country, around the world. And so send me your photos.